A cardiac surgeon spends 14 years learning anatomy before operating. A pilot masters aerodynamics before flying. Yet martial arts students often learn techniques for years without understanding the principles behind them. That sequence is backwards, and it costs you real combat capability. You would not trust a surgeon who learned to cut before studying anatomy. You would not fly with a pilot who mastered the controls before understanding lift. These professions follow a proven sequence: concept first, then mechanics, then application. Martial arts education reverses this. You learn a punch, then a block, then a kick, and only later, if ever, you learn the biomechanical principles that make them work. This inversion creates brittle skills. You can perform movements in the dojo, but under pressure, your brain cannot access the scattered techniques you memorized. You need a conceptual framework to organize your responses. Without it, you default to panic or freeze. The research confirms it. Concept-trained fighters adapt faster and perform better in dynamic scenarios than those trained by technique repetition alone. You might think martial arts have always been taught this way because it works. History tells a different story. Many traditional systems developed during periods of cultural suppression, when practicing combat openly was dangerous. Teachers preserved the forms but withheld the applications to protect themselves or their students. Over generations, the movement survived, but the conceptual why behind each motion faded. What began as a functional fighting system became a cultural artifact. You inherited the shell without the engine. This is not your fault, but it is your responsibility to recognize. If you train techniques without understanding their purpose, you are practicing choreography, not combat. The historical accident that created this gap does not have to define your training. You can bridge it by seeking the principles that make techniques work. You have probably noticed that expert fighters see the fight differently. They do not think in terms of if he does X, I do Y. They think in terms of weight distribution, distance, timing, and leverage. This is not talent. It is cognitive organization. Research on expertise shows that experts build mental frameworks, conceptual structures that let them recognize patterns and predict outcomes. Novices memorize procedures. When you learn techniques first, you build a collection of isolated responses. Each one works only in the specific scenario where you drilled it. When you learn concepts first, you build a flexible system. You can apply the same principle to any situation. Your brain does not have to search through a list of techniques. It reads the situation and applies the relevant concept. You have experienced this if you have ever frozen during a sparring match or self-defense situation. Your body knew the technique, but your brain could not access it. This is called brittle expertise. You trained the movement in a specific context: your dojo, your partner, your rhythm. The real world does not match that context. Your training created a strong memory for the procedure but no understanding of the principle. When the situation changes, your brain cannot adapt. A 2018 study tested martial artists under stress and found that those trained with concept-based methods maintained performance, while technique-trained subjects degraded significantly. The difference was not how much they trained. It was how they organized their knowledge. You can avoid this by shifting your focus from what to do to why it works. You can start changing your training today. First, identify the core principles that govern unarmed combat: balance, structure, range, timing, and leverage. These 5 concepts apply to every technique you know. Second, drill techniques with the principle in mind, not the movement. For example, when you practice a parry, focus on breaking your opponent's structure, not on the hand position. Third, test the principle under varied conditions. Change distance, change intensity, change your partner's size. If the principle still works, you own it. If it fails, you understand the boundary. This is how you build adaptive skill. You do not need to abandon your current training. You need to overlay a conceptual framework on top of it. Every technique becomes a demonstration of a principle, not an end in itself. You now know the problem and the solution. The question is whether you will act on it. The next time you train, ask yourself one question: what principle does this technique demonstrate? If you cannot answer, you are practicing movement, not combat. If you can answer, you can apply that technique in any situation. This is the difference between knowing how and knowing why. Knowing how gives you a tool. Knowing why gives you a toolbox. You want the toolbox. Start with one principle this week. Identify it in every drill you do. Test it against resistant partners. Watch how it changes your performance. You will see the difference immediately. Stop collecting techniques. Start understanding principles. That shift will change everything about how you fight. Train with purpose.